Imagine being Russia for a moment. You've mobilized millions, deployed thousands of tanks. You believe your vast interior is safe, that your enormous landmass gives you depth. Then, in the middle of the night, a missile flies hundreds of kilometers. A drone swarm attacks your oil terminal. Your power grid shudders, and you realize your backlines aren't so safe after all. This isn't fiction. This is the reality of late 2025. The war between Ukraine and Russia has entered a new chapter, one in which Ukraine's arsenal isn't just defending its homeland, it's reaching inside Russia, striking logistics, energy, industry, command posts. And that shift is real, documented, and strategically dangerous for the Kremlin, even if it is not yet decisive. A couple of years ago, Ukraine was on the ropes, outgunned, outmanned, reliant on foreign stockpiles, fighting brutal defensive battles. Fast forward to now, according to President Zelensky, nearly 60% of Ukraine's weapons in use are domestically produced, a historic shift driven by wartime necessity and rapid industrialization. This figure was publicly cited in September 2025. Factories that once repaired farm equipment now turn out drones, missiles, and electronic warfare systems. Ukrainian startups are building long-range strike weapons that didn't exist when the full-scale invasion began. According to multiple Reuters and AP reports, Ukraine is positioning itself as a long-term defense producer, not just an aid recipient. So, how did Ukraine go from holding the line to hitting Russia in the depth? Let's break down the arsenal, the strategy behind it, and what's still coming. We start with the homegrown symbols of this new phase. The R-360 Neptune began life as an anti-ship missile. Ukraine famously used an earlier variant to strike the Russian cruiser Moskva. In 2025, Ukrainian officials and defense analysts showcased an upgraded long Neptune variant, reported with a range of up to about 1,000 kilometers and designed for land attack roles. According to assessments from independent defense institutes summarized by OSW, the modified Neptune is intended to hit strategic targets well beyond the front line. If accurate, that puts key fuel hubs, depots, and command sites inside Russia at risk from a Ukrainian-designed system. Then comes the FP5 Flamingo. According to reporting from AP and Euronews, the Ukrainian firm Firepoint presents the Flamingo as a cruise missile capable of around 3,000 kilometers range with a 1,150 kilogram warhead, with ambitions for serial production. That is, on paper, a weapon that can hit deep into Russia's strategic heart. Some experts quoted by OSW caution that the advertised scale and performance may be optimistic and partly information strategy, that skepticism matters, and you should mention it. But even at a fraction of the claimed capacity, a domestically built heavy long-range missile signals where Ukraine is heading, it wants its own strategic reach, independent of allied red lines. Layered on top of that are Western-supplied deep strike tools. The UK and France have provided Storm Shadow, SCALP cruise missiles, stealthy low-flying weapons with ranges around 250 kilometers. According to Reuters, these have been used by Ukraine against high-value Russian targets, including in occupied Crimea and, in later stages, strikes reported in Russian regions such as Kursk. Then there is ATACMS, the U.S. Army Tactical Missile System. In 2024, Reuters confirmed that Washington quietly delivered extended-range ATACMS, which Ukraine used to hit Russian airfields and helicopters in occupied territory and later in Russian regions once restrictions were eased. These missiles, with ranges up to roughly 300 kilometers depending on variant, give Ukraine precision options against air bases, logistics hubs, and S-300, S-400 batteries that once enjoyed relative sanctuary. Put together, you get a deep strike ecosystem. Ukrainian missiles, Western cruise missiles, ATACMS, and long-range drones combining to steadily raise the cost of Russia's war. This is not about glorifying strikes. It's about explaining a verifiable strategic shift. Every hit on a fuel depot or rail hub is pressure on Russia's ability to sustain offensive operations, and that's exactly the point. If the missiles are the scalpel, the drones are the swarm. Since 2023 to 2025, Ukraine has built an enormous drone ecosystem. Reconnaissance, kamikaze, long-range, and now interceptor drones. AP and Reuters reporting from Ukrainian factories describe companies like Firepoint producing significant numbers of FP1 long-range drones, credited by Ukrainian officials with a large share of deep strike operations, with ranges reported up to around 1,600 kilometers. According to President Zelensky, Ukraine set a target in mid-2025 to produce 500 to 1,000 interceptor drones per day as a low-cost shield against Russian Shahed and cruise missile attacks. Reuters' coverage of these announcements makes clear drones are no longer a side project. They are central to Ukraine's air defense and strike strategy. In my opinion, this is one of the smartest adaptations of the war. Instead of burning million-dollar missiles on cheap incoming drones, Ukraine is trying to meet them with cheaper, homegrown interceptors, turning air defense into an industrial numbers game it can actually actually compete in. On offense, long-range kamikaze drones give Ukraine a deniable, scalable way to hit refineries, depots, and factories. Multiple verified strikes in 2025 targeted Russian oil facilities and logistics nodes deep beyond the border. Public statements by Ukrainian leadership and Western coverage link these attacks to newly developed Ukrainian drones and missiles, and President Zelensky has said such strikes contributed to fuel disruptions inside Russia. At sea, naval drones like the Magura series have repeatedly hit Russian vessels and infrastructure in the Black Sea and near Crimea, forcing Russia to reposition ships and complicating its ability to operate close to the Ukrainian coast. Open sources and Ukrainian Navy statements describe these unmanned surface vehicles as a key factor in pushing parts of the Black Sea Fleet away from Crimea's western coast. This segment should be framed as based on open source assessments and Ukrainian claims, cross-checked by independent imagery where available. All of this means Russia can no longer treat distance as protection. Range is cheap now. Striking deep only matters if you survive the return fire. Ukraine's ability to stay in the fight has depended heavily on air defense. According to NATO and AP reporting, Ukraine has received layered systems, including US Patriot batteries, NASAMS, German IRIS-T SLM, and others. German manufacturer Diehl has publicly stated that IRIS-T systems in Ukraine achieved extremely high interception rates against Russian missiles and drones in some attack waves. On top of that, newer systems are appearing. Open reports and Ukrainian officials have highlighted the arrival of Rheinmetall's Skynex, a next-generation air defense system designed to counter drones and cruise missiles using rapid-fire cannons and programmable ammunition. It's a cheaper and faster answer to Russia's endless waves of Shaheds. Now, to be clear, most of what we know about Skynex's performance comes from manufacturer data and Ukrainian field reports, not fully independent battlefield audits. But if even half those claims hold up, it represents one of the most efficient drone killers Ukraine has. Then there's the UK-developed Gravehawk system, a modular, containerized, short-range air defense platform reportedly tailored with Ukraine's battlefield lessons in mind. It's mobile, adaptable, and built to shoot down drones and cruise missiles rather than chase Cold War-era bombers. Again, official details are still emerging, so we're talking about what's been publicly announced and demonstrated so far. But the philosophy behind it is clear. Fast deployment, low cost, high adaptability, exactly what Ukraine needs in a war defined by drone saturation. Together, this creates what you can call, narratively, Ukraine's iron forest, a patchwork of Western and domestic systems that doesn't make Ukraine invulnerable, but has prevented Russia from achieving air supremacy and blunted some of the heaviest missile campaigns. It's worth remembering, systems like Skynex and Gravehawk aren't about escalation, they're about protection. These are defensive platforms built to shield cities and infrastructure from drone and missile attacks, the kind of strikes that independent observers and journalists have documented across Ukraine since the start of the war. We can't talk about this war like it's only drones and missiles. Artillery is still the backbone. Systems like HIMARS and M270, French Caesars, German PZH-2000S, Slovak Zuzana IIs, and Polish Crabs have given Ukraine more accurate and longer-range tube and rocket artillery than it had pre-2022. Openly documented HIMARS strikes on ammo dumps and command posts in 2022 to 2024 showed how precision artillery could erase Russia's heavy logistics clusters. According to US and Ukrainian officials at the time, those strikes significantly complicated Russian supply efforts in occupied areas. In 2025, this artillery ecosystem is being fed by multinational shell sourcing initiatives. According to OSW analysis of the Czech Ammunition Initiative, Ukraine has already received well over 1,155mm shells through joint European efforts, with plans pushing that close to 1.8 million by the end of 2025. That doesn't erase Russia's numerical advantage, but it narrows it enough to keep Ukraine in the fight and make its precision assets count. The synergy is key. Drones for targeting, Western guns for reach, domestic production to refill. Less cinematic than Flamingo, but absolutely essential. For most of the war, Russian aviation could threaten Ukraine from relative distance, while Ukraine's own air force flew old Soviet jets with limited missiles. That picture is changing. In early 2025, Reuters reported that the first F-16 supplied by European partners, particularly the Netherlands and Denmark, arrived in Ukraine, along with Mirage jets from France. While numbers and basing are kept deliberately vague for security reasons, Ukrainian officials have confirmed they are entering combat service. These jets, properly armed, give Ukraine better radar, better missiles, and better chances to contest Russian glide bomb and missile platforms. Then comes the potential big leap. The Gripen. As of November 2025, Sweden and Ukraine are publicly discussing a major deal for up to around 150 JAS-39 Gripen E fighters, with Sweden's defense minister telling Reuters that Stockholm could help finance such a package with aid and export support. This is not yet a signed contract, but it's sufficiently concrete to discuss in a future capabilities segment. Analysts quoted by Ukrainian and European outlets have argued the Gripen, designed to operate from rough airstrips with strong electronic warfare and beyond visual range, missile options would fit Ukraine's needs extremely well. If F-16s are the bridge, Gripens could be the long-term architecture. In my opinion, if even a fraction of the proposed Gripen package is delivered and integrated with cruise missiles like Storm Shadow/SCALP or future European standoff weapons, Ukraine's ability to police its own skies and threaten Russian targets at distance would be transformed. Of course, all of this still depends on what actually happens next. The Gripen deal, the F-16 deliveries, they're not instant game changers. Training pipelines, maintenance networks, dispersal tactics, even the political will to keep these jets supplied, all of that will decide whether they become true battlefield assets or just another powerful headline. In wars like this, technology alone doesn't win. It's how fast you can learn to use it. There's another piece of this story that's often overlooked, but it might be one of the most important of all. Ukraine isn't just being armed by Europe anymore. It's becoming part of Europe's defense engine. According to reports from Reuters and the OSW Institute, Ukraine is opening new arms export and co-production offices in Berlin and Copenhagen. At the same time, countries like Germany, Poland, the Czech Republic, and the Nordic states are scaling up ammunition and air defense manufacturing, and they're doing it with Ukrainian partners. President Zelensky has said openly that his goal is for Ukraine to become a major arms exporter after the war. Not because war is business, but because lasting peace will depend on having real industrial deterrence. In other words, Ukraine wants to make sure it never has to start from zero again. What this means is that all these new missiles and drones we've been talking about, the Neptunes, the Flamingos, the Maguras, they're not just one-off projects. They're the visible edge of a much deeper transformation. Shared factories, joint missile production, European funding, and technology pipelines flowing both ways. If this integration holds, it creates a lasting problem for Moscow. Even if the front lines freeze, Ukraine will remain on Russia's doorstep, not just as a military power, but as a NATO-backed manufacturing hub, armed, modern, and permanent. But this isn't something to romanticize. It also raises difficult questions about arms control, regional stability, and how Europe manages the balance between rearmament and restraint once the war slows down. Still, one thing is clear: Ukraine isn't just part of Europe's story anymore. It's becoming one of the engines driving it. And while Europe and Ukraine tighten their industrial grip, Moscow is watching this transformation with growing unease. Because every new co-production deal, every shared factory, every missile that rolls off a joint assembly line, it doesn't just arm Ukraine, it changes the entire balance of power across the continent. Russia can see it. It knows that even if the shooting slows, the machinery of this new alliance won't stop. And that's where we turn next, to the Kremlin's response. How is Russia adapting to this new battlefield reality? Can it counter Ukraine's growing reach, or is it simply buying time while its war machine runs down? Let's take a look at what Moscow is doing to survive and why that may not be enough. But to keep this story balanced, we have to look at how Russia is fighting back, because it is adapting. After Ukraine's long-range strikes began hitting deep targets, Moscow started reinforcing key sites with extra layers of air defense. More S-300 and S-400 systems were pulled back from the front to shield refineries, airfields, and command centers. Russia's also begun dispersing its aircraft after devastating ATACMS strikes destroyed several helicopters on the ground, spreading assets across smaller bases and civilian airports to make them harder to hit. According to multiple Western intelligence assessments and independent open-source analysts, Russia has stepped up production of glide bombs, ballistic missiles, and drones, many built with imported or sanctioned components. The goal is simple: overwhelm Ukraine's defenses through quantity, even if the quality isn't always there. These moves do blunt some of Ukraine's advantages. Not every missile lands. Not every drone makes it through. Russia still occupies vast stretches of Ukrainian territory and continues launching brutal assaults. But adaptation comes at a price. Every S-400 battery moved to guard an oil facility is one less defending the front. Every extra kilometer a fuel convoy travels to avoid a missile strike is another weak link in an already strained logistics chain. Slowly, that kind of erosion eats away at Russia's ability to sustain the fight. In my view, this war has now become a race of industrial endurance and adaptation speed. Ukraine is trying to offset its smaller population with precision, innovation, and alliances. Russia is trying to offset its tactical weaknesses with mass and terror. And while Ukraine's new deep strike tools are tilting that balance, they haven't settled it, not yet. The outcome will depend on who can adapt faster, produce longer, and survive the pressure of modern war's industrial grind. Before we wrap up, it's important to take a step back and talk about something bigger than technology or tactics, the human side of this war. Many of the systems we've talked about, the Patriots, NASAMS, IRIS-Ts, and other interceptors are defensive by design. They're built to protect cities, power plants, and civilians from missile and drone attacks that independent media and international monitors have documented since the war began. When it comes to Ukraine's strikes inside Russia, Kyiv and many of its partners argue these are acts of self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, targeted at military facilities like air bases and fuel depots directly supporting the invasion. That's their legal position, and it's one shared by several international law experts. But under international humanitarian law, every side in this conflict is still bound by one principle: to distinguish between military and civilian targets, and to minimize harm to civilians. There have been allegations and debates around some strikes, and those deserve careful scrutiny, not applause. Because this video isn't about glorifying destruction. It's about understanding how modern warfare is evolving, the strategies, the technology, and the consequences that come with them. War is always brutal, but explaining it clearly, factually, and responsibly is how we make sense of it, and maybe how we learn from it. So, where does this leave us? Ukraine is no longer just a frontline state begging for shells. It is a country fielding its own long-range missiles like Long Neptune, and potentially at scale, Flamingo. A country using Western tools, Storm Shadow, SCALP, ATACMS, F-16s, Patriots not just as one-off political gifts, but as parts of a growing integrated kill chain. A country turning drones into both a spear and a shield, long-range strike UAVs punching deep, interceptor drones, and modern air defenses catching incoming waves. A country being woven into a wider European defense industrial network, from co-production deals to prospective Gripen squadrons. For Russia, that means the old assumption: we can always escalate, they will run out, is less secure than before. Its rear is pressured, its logistics taxed, its psychological comfort zone narrowed. This does not mean Ukraine is crushing Russia in the sense of imminent total victory. Russia still has occupied territory, large reserves, and political willingness to absorb losses. The front remains brutal and uncertain. The winter energy war, manpower issues, and political shifts in Western capitals all cut the other way.